Celebrations on the island. Duran, with his links to the old regime, fled across the Straits of Florida to Miami. There he joined other young exiles keen to be part of any attempt to unseat the new revolutionary government.
I arrived in Miami around September 1959. By that time already there was a very atmosphere here of conspiracy in Miami. There were agents, CIA agents all over the place, even though I don't believe that there was the formal seed for what ultimately became the Bay of Pigs invasion at that time. But there were people that were trying to do actions against Cuba. And of course the United States government and through the CIA was keeping a close tab on everything that was happening.
Soon, despite the constant denials in Washington, the CIA was actively organizing the Miami exiles.
There was a recruitment office, and there were places where you went also to have your health checked. Everybody would talk about it, and there were people in every corner who were saying, I just went and recruited, and I'll be leaving the next couple of days. And it was one of the surprising things about the effort was that it was so open.
There was also a plentiful supply of arms and training in how to use them. By early 1961, Duran and his fellow conspirators had moved from Miami to a CIA training camp hidden in the Guatemalan mountains. The plan was to enter Cuba secretly and then begin organizing anti-Castro fighters.
We thought that we were being trained to be the seed of a guerrilla war. We thought that we would be dropped in the mountains of Cuba and that we would organize different guerrilla focuses throughout the island and begin something very similar as to what Fidel Castro actually did. Basically start a guerrilla war and try to bring down the government. For some reason, and unfortunately, the plan changed along the way, and it ended up, as happened, to a full invasion of Cuba through the frontal attack. Something that was not the original of the plan, and it was done hastily at the very end, I think 3 or 4 weeks prior to our landing.
Now an invasion force, and baptized the 2056 Brigade, they travelled from Guatemala to Nicaragua. There some of the rebels boarded rickety planes to parachute onto the island. Most of the others, like Alfredo Duran, boarded boats bound for Playa Girón, or the Bay of Pigs, an isolated area 130 miles south of Havana. They'd been told it was the ideal place for landing.
We landed at night, and it was one of the first nighttime amphibious landing in the history of warfare. We were supposed to be landing on beaches which were without rocks, and ultimately it was a very rocky beach, and a lot of the landing craft, which were basically pleasure boats, they were not really landing craft, hit the rocks, and many of them sank, and we were thrown into the water with our ammunitions and everything else.
That was just the start of things going wrong. In Nicaragua, port workers sympathetic to Castro had alerted the revolutionary government that the invaders were on their way. The element of surprise had been lost.
And in the morning, the Cuban Air Force discovered our landing ships and basically came in and bombed, sank 2 of them, and the other ones had to retreat. So there we were in the beach, just with the ammunition and supplies that we had on hand.
As for the second-hand planes provided by the Americans to give the invasion force air cover, they were ill-equipped for the task.
We had old B-25s and B-23s that were supposed to cover our attack in Cuba. And during the 3 days of fighting there, we were protected for a while by the B-25s, even though most of them got shot down because due to the distance from Nicaragua to Cuba and fly back to Nicaragua, they had to take the tail guns away from the B-25 so that they can have more fuel. And therefore, the very meager Air Force that Fidel Castro had was, all he had to do was get him back of the B-25 and they would shoot him down.
Worse still, the support that the exiles had been expecting from the anti-Castro underground on the island failed to turn up.
The underground, which was also handled by the CIA, was supposed to be alerted in time to blow up bridges and put impediments on the highways that led to the Bay of Pigs. And that did not happen. Probably the underground had been penetrated by Cuban intelligence, so they were not forewarned that we were coming, and that part of the plan broke down. So the bridges and roads coming to Playa Girón were not destroyed. So it was easy to get to where we were.
For 2 days, Duran and his fellow fighters struggled to make their way inland. Gradually, they were outnumbered and outgunned by Castro's forces.
After the third day, we ran out of ammunition and we ran out of supplies at all, and we were not resupplied. So we were basically abandoned on the beach, and we had no other choice than to fall back to the sea and hope to be rescued, until we find out, of course, that we will not be rescued.
That must have been a difficult moment when you started to run out of ammunition and you realized that you're going to have to retreat.
It was a very difficult moment because we all of a sudden realized that we had to separate from our battle companies, and me and 3 other fellows decided that we should go into the swamp, try to cross and get out of the swamp, and try then to change clothes and get some clothes from some farmers or steal them someplace, and dress and try to get to Havana and try to somehow escape back to the United States or take asylum at an embassy. I personally was captured while trying to cross a sugar mill to steal some clothing and change clothes. And while I was crossing the sugar mill, I was brought upon by militiamen with dogs, and I was captured. We were so fatigued and so tired that and we expected to be shot. So when I was captured, I told the people that captured me, just give me some water and shoot me.
But the militias didn't shoot him. He and more than 1,000 other prisoners were kept alive. It was, after all, a perfect propaganda opportunity.
We were put in buses and trucks the next day and driven through Havana. Through that whole process, from the sugar mill town to the city of Havana, all along the highway, there were people shouting and yelling at us, and we finally ended up in what is called the Sport Palace in Havana, which is basically a sporting stadium. And there we were sat in the seats in the stadium, and they started processing us.
You must have felt, to a certain extent, humiliated.
Well, more than humiliation, because we all felt that we were there doing our job and that we did the best we could under the circumstances. We have been misled and abandoned, and that was the type of disappointment that we had.
Duran spent the next 18 months in jail in Cuba before being sent back to the US along with other exiles in exchange for cash and medicines.
In Miami, it was like a festive day. The whole city was celebrating the arrival of the members of the Bay of Pigs.
Even President Kennedy, Cuban flag in hand, was there to welcome them back.
I can assure you that this flag will be returned to this brigade in a free Havana.
We all felt like a hero, and not only did we all feel like a hero, we also had a very strong desire to try it again. That was the conversation of all of us from the day of arrival. We're trying to see how we could try to organize again or try to get some help to continue on the struggle.
Alfredo Duran did eventually get back to Cuba, but not to the Crimean War. In 2009, he took part in a convention marking the 40th anniversary of the invasion. Duran and some of the American officials who'd been involved in the plan were allowed back in by the Castro government.
As soon as I got out of the airport in Havana and I started going through the city, I felt something strange, and all of a sudden I realized that very little had changed in Havana. That all the buildings that I remember I could recognize, that I recognized everything, and I felt as if I had never left.
What most struck you about returning?
At the end of the convention itself, we sort of found common grounds between the people who fought against each other. There was sort of like a brotherhood that occurs when people who have fought against each other meet in peace and discuss what happened in those events. We finally ended up with people who had shot at each other becoming very gracious to each other and very respectful of each other, and ultimately, in some cases, even friends of each other.
One of the new friendships that Duran made was with a man who'd been asked to drive him back to Playa Girón for a visit. Just by chance, his driver had been an army officer at the time of the failed invasion.
The gentleman would not talk to me on the whole trip. I mean, he was basically very, very angry that he had to take me there and basically thought me of as an enemy. Except that when we got to, I told him to take me to a place called San Blas, which is where I spent the 3 days fighting. And it just so happened that that's where he had fought also. And we started comparing notes. Then we went to have lunch together, and we ultimately ended up as very good friends.
In many ways, Alfredo Duran is not a typical member of that Bay of Pigs invasion force. Now, in his late 70s, still living in Miami, he no longer favours regime change in Cuba by force, rather through dialogue, a position that has earned him charges of traitor from others in the exile community. And 50 years on, he says, he wouldn't do the same again.
I have no regret about the whole experience of the Bay of Pigs itself. The only regret, and I think that if the Bay of Pigs were today, I would not do it, is that looking back on it, a lot of Cubans killed a lot of other Cubans. We were basically brothers, and in fact there were brothers and cousins fighting each other. And if I had to do that again, I would not do it. I think that you can only accept it in the context of the time, and the context of the time was a confrontation between the Soviet Union and the United States, and the whole thing that happened around the Cold War confrontations. At the time, it was the thing that we had to do. If it were today, I would not do it. I would not take arms against my fellow Cubans under any circumstances.
Alfredo Duran ending Witness from Mike Lanchin. The editor is Kirsty Reid. And if you'd like a daily download of this programme, just search for BBC Witness online.